Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly busy and occasionally ridiculous life of Paleolithic humans. What did cavemen actually do all day? Turns out it wasn't just rock smashing and fire discovery montages. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The average day for a Paleolithic human started not with an alarm clock, but with the gradual light of dawn or the grumbling stomach of someone nearby. If you were lucky, you'd slept through the night without being stepped on, bitten by insects, or startled by the snoring of a relative sleeping 2 inches from your face. Most people slept on animal hides or directly on packed earth. Some made the experience more luxurious by adding a layer of dry leaves or grass. A communal fire usually burned in the center, not for ambiance, but for heat, protection, and the occasional midnight snack check. You didn't have a room. You didn't have privacy. You had proximity. Sleeping in a small, tight group wasn't optional. It was survival. Predators and cold didn't care about your need for space. If you slept away from others, you might wake up missing a toe, or not wake up at all. Mornings began with fire check duty. If the fire had died out, someone, usually the last person who fell asleep, had to rekindle it. This wasn't a flick the switch situation. Fire making involved patience, friction, dry material, and the determination of someone who did not want to freeze. Next came a quick check of the tools and weapons. Spears, scrapers, and knives weren't decoration. They were lifelines. A dull edge or cracked stone could mean a failed hunt or an inability to prepare food. If you were lucky, you had your own set. If not, you borrowed from someone else, which usually came with strings attached. Favor trading was its own form of prehistoric currency. Children were often the first to stir. They'd wiggle, make noise, and start poking things they shouldn't. Breakfast was less of a meal and more of a hopeful search party. If anything edible had survived the night, like dried meat or a scrap of roasted root, you celebrated quietly and ate fast. If not, you went foraging. Food gathering was seasonal and improvisational. Spring offered greens and shoots. Summer meant berries and fruits. Winter meant gnawing on regrets. Foraging was less about flavor and more about not dying. Roots, nuts, seeds, and bugs were all on the menu. Bugs, especially, were protein-packed and easier to catch than a rabbit, though less fun to chew. Water was fetched early. A nearby stream was ideal. A puddle worked in a pinch. Boiling water wasn't a concept yet, so most drinking experiences came with a game of digestive roulette. Some survived. Some, became cautionary tales, and then came hygiene, or the Paleolithic version of it. Personal cleanliness in the Paleolithic era was based on practicality, not aesthetics. If something on your body was getting in the way of survival, or if your smell was bad enough to draw complaints, it was time to do something about it. Bathing was seasonal and dependent on access to water. If there was a stream nearby and it wasn't freezing, you washed in it. If not, you got creative. People wiped off grime using leaves, dry grass, sand, or even animal fat. Yes, fat. It might sound weird now, but scrubbing your skin with fat actually helped with insulation and keeping bugs away. Not exactly spa day luxurious, but it worked. Teeth were cleaned using fibrous sticks or bones. Cavemen didn't brush, but they also didn't eat candy, so cavities were rare. That said, tooth wear was extreme. Between gritty meat, unprocessed grains, and the occasional sand accidentally ground into meals, teeth wore down fast. Toothaches were common. Tooth removal, that involved a rock and a lot of pain. Hair was usually long, wild, and mostly ignored. Some tied it back, others didn't. Lice were a constant issue. Remedies ranged from using ash or dirt to just scratching a lot and hoping for the best. Eventually, some groups started using primitive combs made of bone or wood, hinting at the earliest signs of grooming culture. Clothes didn't help the situation much. Animal hides were thick, warm, and completely unbreathable. They were rarely washed unless the rain did it for you. If someone smelled bad, you either ignored it, blamed the wind, or in some cases, moved to the other side of the fire. Despite all this, early humans weren't walking disease bags. Their immune systems were tough, and over time, they learned enough about cleanliness to avoid major outbreaks. Plus, when everyone smells equally bad, you don't really notice. Unless, of course, someone rolled in a dead animal for camouflage, which, believe it or not, was a thing. And yes, people complained about that too. Next came the main event of the day, the hunt. Hunting wasn't a solo adventure. It was a full-team operation involving everyone from seasoned trackers to the loud guy whose only job was shouting, "That's not a deer!" Large animals like mammoths, bison, and wild horses were the ultimate prize. One successful hunt could feed the group for a week, but those animals were huge, fast, and extremely uninterested in becoming dinner. Planning a hunt took strategy. Scouts tracked herds, checked for fresh prints, and looked for watering holes. The rest of the team prepared weapons and set up ambush points, sometimes near cliffs, rivers, or even pits covered with branches. If the plan worked, you trapped the animal. If it didn't, you got a nice workout and a dramatic story. Ambushes were loud and chaotic. Spears flew. People shouted. The goal was simple: make something big fall down before it took one of you with it. When it worked, there were cheers, meat, and respect. When it didn't, there were bruises, excuses, and finger-pointing. The wind shifted was a favorite. Smaller game, deer, boar, rabbits, required less coordination but still took effort. Sometimes a lone hunter could use a trap, snare, or silent approach. But even that went sideways more often than not. You chased a pig through the forest once, you never forgot it. Bringing home a kill meant more than dinner. It meant status. The successful hunter got first pick of the meat, maybe an easier night of chores, and definitely bragging rights. But sharing was still common. One person couldn't survive alone, no matter how sharp their spear. Hunting wasn't just about meat, it was about teamwork, risk, and timing. It was survival, strategy, and community, all rolled into a sprint after a creature that really didn't want to be caught. After hygiene, or at least whatever passed for it, came tool maintenance. This wasn't some side chore. It was central to survival. Your tools were your lifeline. They helped you hunt, butcher, dig, scrape, and defend yourself. And they broke, often, so part of each day was spent hunched over a rock, smacking it with another rock, trying to chip just the right edge without smashing your own thumb. Flint and obsidian were the materials of choice, assuming you were lucky enough to live near a good source. They chipped in clean, sharp flakes that could slice, carve, or jab. You didn't just grab any rock and hope for the best. You had to shape it, sometimes for hours. The goal: hand axes, spearheads, scrapers, awls, and occasionally the all-purpose rock with a handle. Some people were naturals at tool making. They got a reputation. Others begged, borrowed, or traded for gear, usually in exchange for food, help, or the promise not to complain about the smell anymore. If your best spear broke mid-hunt and you had to borrow from someone else, you better believe you owed them dinner. Sharpening was constant. A dull tool wasn't just ineffective, it was dangerous. You could cut yourself, fail to pierce a hide, or waste hours trying to slice through something that laughed at your weak edge. Bone tools also appeared over time. Lighter and more flexible than stone, they were great for finer tasks, like sewing hides or prying things open without risking your good axe. Creativity was essential. You had to adapt. You had to test. And when your carefully shaped flint scraper shattered 2 minutes into use, you sighed and started over. Toolkits were guarded, passed down, even stolen. If you lost your tools, you weren't just embarrassed, you were in real trouble. No tools meant no food, no defense, no leverage in the social barter system. So yes, cavemen weren't just hunters, they were blacksmiths of the Stone Age, crafting, shaping, and sharpening the things that kept them one step ahead of nature. Sometimes. Barely. But not everyone hunted. Some people had a different task, one just as vital and a lot less dangerous: foraging. Foraging didn't involve charging at a mammoth, but it was the unsung hero of daily survival. Foragers, often women, elders, and younger kids, provided the bulk of the calories the group consumed. They covered serious ground, scanning the environment for anything edible: berries, roots, nuts, seeds, greens, and even the occasional mushroom, though that came with risk. Knowing what was safe to eat wasn't instinct, it was taught. Some plants were nutritious, others were deadly, and some just gave you a really bad time. This knowledge was passed down through generations, often in the form of stories, warnings, or "Remember when Grandpa almost died from eating that shiny blue berry?" Foraging also meant multitasking. While out gathering, you might also collect firewood, feathers, or medicinal herbs. Kids learned by tagging along, mimicking adults, and being gently reminded not to eat random bugs or touch itchy leaves. Wildlife was a threat here too. Competing with birds, squirrels, or even bears over food happened. And yes, stepping into a wasp nest while reaching for honey was a mistake no one made twice. Still, foraging was steady work. Unlike hunting, it usually produced results. Plants didn't run, nuts didn't hide, and with good timing, one afternoon of foraging could supply meals for days, or at least snacks to hold everyone over until the hunters hopefully came back with more than blisters. Foragers didn't always get the glory, but when dinner was nothing but roots and roasted bugs, you knew who had saved the day. Now, shelter building wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. Contrary to the popular image, not every Paleolithic human lived in a cave. Caves were great if you could find one, especially during winter. They were sheltered, defensible, and didn't blow away in a storm. But caves were limited. Some were already occupied by bears, other humans, or things you didn't want to evict. So when caves weren't available, people built their own homes. And by homes, we mean huts. Basic, drafty, slightly wobbly huts. Construction materials included whatever was lying around: branches, animal hides, stones, grass, bones, and if you lived near mammoths, actual mammoth bones. Frameworks were lashed together with vines or animal sinew and covered in hides or packed with mud. The result, a slightly lumpy shelter that maybe stayed upright during light wind. Building was a group effort. One person held things, another tied stuff, and someone stood off to the side with very strong opinions and zero construction skills. If it collapsed, you tried again. Prehistoric building codes didn't exist. Neither did blueprints or tape measures. You eyeballed everything. There were no rooms, no doors, maybe a flap, maybe a hole for smoke to escape if you were fancy. The fire stayed in the center, and everyone tried to claim the spot farthest from the draft. Seasonal shelters were common, light huts for summer that could be left behind, heavier, reinforced structures for winter. Insulation. That was a thick animal hide, or just huddling closer together and hoping for the best. Leaks happened. Drafts were everywhere, but the goal wasn't comfort. It was survival. If the roof didn't cave in and your fire stayed lit, you called it a win. Some of these shelters were even portable, kind of like tents. If your group moved often, you needed something you could take apart, carry, and rebuild without too much drama. So, while Paleolithic people weren't building castles, they weren't exactly sleeping under trees either. They made what they needed. They adjusted when it failed. And somehow, they stayed alive through rain, snow, wind, and wild animals trying to turn their hut into a snack bar. And at the end of the day, if you had a roof, a fire, and didn't wake up covered in frostbite or bear tracks, that was a good day. As the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched long across the land, the Paleolithic world shifted into its slowest, softest rhythm of the day, evening. With no clocks, no lamps, and no Netflix queue to catch up on, time was marked by light and fire. Darkness arrived quickly, completely, and without negotiation. So before it swallowed the world, the group prepared. Dinner, if it happened, was quiet and communal. Maybe roasted meat from a successful hunt. Maybe foraged roots boiled in a hide-lined pit. Maybe just a handful of dried berries or a squirrel leg left over from earlier. Meals weren't private. Everyone sat in a loose circle around the fire, cross-legged, crouched, or leaning against rocks and each other, eating with fingers, shared sticks, or bone tools. There was no table, no rules, but still, unspoken etiquette. Don't hog the fire. Don't steal someone's piece of meat. Don't take the last bite unless you earned it. Those who hunted often got first pick. Those who cooked or foraged earned quiet thanks in glances, not words. After eating, the group talked, not just about food or survival, but about memories, stories, warnings. The day's events exaggerated just enough to make people laugh or shiver. One person might mimic the mammoth that got away. Another would boast about how close they came to a deer. Kids listened wide-eyed. Adults chimed in with their own versions. The old ones especially became story keepers. Their words passed on knowledge, where to hunt, what plants to avoid, what the stars meant. Storytelling wasn't filler. It was survival wrapped in entertainment. Knowledge passed down through exaggeration and grunts and sweeping gestures. Music sometimes joined in, not melodies like we know them, but rhythmic banging of stones, simple chants, humming. A child might spin in a circle just because the firelight made their shadow dance. Someone might tap two bones together or blow air through a hollow stick. These weren't rehearsals. They were release, a way to let the day fall off your shoulders. And sometimes there was silence. The kind of silence that only happens in wild places, broken only by the crackle of firewood or the soft shifting of someone adjusting their hide. People stared into the flames, not because they were thinking deep thoughts, but because the fire was hypnotic, safe, warm, alive. The fire was the heart of the evening. It brought people close, gave them something to stare at, and reminded them that even in the dark, there was still light. Children usually fell asleep first, curled next to parents or nestled in piles of furs and hides. Adults lingered longer, watching the stars, listening for sounds, checking tools one last time, maybe whispering, maybe just breathing. Eventually everyone drifted to sleep, some near the fire, others in shelters or caves. The night wasn't guaranteed to be safe, but it was the best rest they could get. And before anyone fully settled, someone always checked the fire. That was the last task of the day, feeding it, guarding it, making sure it would still be there in the morning, because tomorrow they'd do it all again. Now let's talk about something that rarely gets mentioned in history books: love, or at least the Paleolithic version of it. There were no dating apps, no candlelit dinners, no love letters or grand proposals. But even in the Stone Age, humans connected. Romance existed, quiet, practical, and sometimes awkward. The first step? Proximity. You lived in a small group, maybe 20, 30, 40 people, which meant your dating pool was whoever wasn't already paired up or related to you. Not exactly a rom-com lineup, but people made it work. Flirting wasn't about clever lines. It was about actions. Did someone share food with you, help scrape your hide, sit next to you by the fire night after night? That was interest. Bringing someone a special root you found or offering them the best piece of meat you caught, that was kind of a big deal. Not laughing when they tripped chasing a squirrel. Basically a marriage proposal. Romance was effort, not words. There were no perfumes, no baths, and everyone smelled like smoke and mammoth fat. But people still looked for companionship. They still wanted to feel safe next to someone, to share warmth, to know they weren't going through this wild world completely alone. Appearance mattered, but not in the way it does today. You weren't judged on your outfit. Everyone wore some version of fur and dirt. What really counted was skill. Could you hunt? Could you forage? Could you keep the fire going without burning your eyebrows off? That was attractive. Pair bonds formed slowly. Sometimes they lasted years, sometimes not. If two people stopped sharing food or stopped building things together, that was pretty much a breakup. No paperwork, no big argument, just a quiet change, a shift in who you sat beside at dinner. There were probably jealousies too. But Paleolithic people didn't necessarily see relationships the way later agricultural societies did. There's evidence that early humans may have had more fluid and flexible social bonds, less possessiveness, more focus on cooperation and survival than personal ownership. Children often came next, not always planned, not always expected. But when they did, the relationship took on a new meaning, shared responsibility. Raising a child was hard enough in a safe world. In the Paleolithic one, it took two, and sometimes more. Still, even with dirt under their nails and calluses on their hands, early humans figured out how to love, to care, to share, to wake up next to someone and think, "You didn't throw a rock at me today. I like that." It wasn't poetry, it wasn't flowers, but it was real, and in a way, that makes it even more human. Even in a world of stone and fire, there was something deeper moving beneath the surface: belief. Paleolithic people didn't leave behind books or scriptures, but they left behind something just as telling: signs of wonder, signs that they looked at the world and asked questions. What is life? Why do we die? What comes after? We don't know exactly what they believed, but we have clues. In some caves, deep where no one lived, they left symbols on the walls: handprints, spirals, animals painted in motion. Why would someone crawl into the darkest part of a cave just to draw a bison? Why go through that effort if it wasn't important? Maybe it was a kind of prayer, a way to ask for a successful hunt, or to honor the animal's spirit after a kill. Some anthropologists think the cave walls were more than just art galleries. They were sacred spaces, temples lit only by flickering firelight, where shadows danced and breath turned to mist. A quiet place to feel something larger than yourself. Burials offer even more clues. In some sites, archaeologists have found bodies buried carefully, not tossed aside, laid in fetal positions, sprinkled with red ochre, a natural pigment, sometimes with tools, beads, or animal bones placed nearby. That tells us something. It tells us they cared, that death wasn't just the end, that maybe, just maybe, they believed in something after, a journey, a spirit, a return. There may have been rituals too, dances around the fire, whispers to the wind, gestures made with sticks or stones to keep the bad things away. Someone in the group, maybe an elder, maybe just someone who saw things differently, might have been the spiritual guide, the one people turned to when the world didn't make sense, when the hunt failed, when someone got sick, when the stars looked strange. This person wasn't a priest in robes. They were someone who listened, who watched, who understood that not all knowledge comes from the outside. And then there were the dreams. In a time before distractions, people slept in silence. No cities, no screens, just firelight and stars. Dreams may have felt more real. Maybe they believed dreams were messages from ancestors, from the earth, from the spirits of the animals they shared the world with. Paleolithic spirituality wasn't about rules. It wasn't about temples or commandments. It was about connection to nature, to each other, to something they couldn't see but felt. In a world filled with danger, mystery, and beauty, belief was a comfort, a compass, a reason to keep going. And maybe that's what belief has always been. If belief was the soul of Paleolithic life, art was its voice. And nowhere did that voice echo louder than inside the deep hidden caves of the ancient world. Tucked behind narrow passages, through cold, dark tunnels, early humans created something extraordinary: cave paintings, not just doodles or random marks, but full, vivid scenes of life. Herds of bison thundering across stone walls, stags mid-leap, wild horses, lions, rhinos, captured in motion with surprising detail. They painted with charcoal, red ochre, yellow clay, and sometimes even manganese black. Crushed minerals mixed with animal fat or spit turned into ancient paint. Their brushes, fingers, feathers, chewed sticks, or hollow bones used to spray pigment, like a prehistoric airbrush. No one knows for certain why they did it. Maybe it was magic, an attempt to bring luck to a hunt, draw the animal, catch the spirit, make it real. Maybe it was a way to remember, a record of the herds they followed, the dangers they faced, the stories they didn't want to lose. Or maybe it was simply human, the urge to create, to take something inside and put it on the wall, to say, I was here, this mattered. Some caves, like Lascaux in France, are covered in hundreds of images, layered over generations, hidden from the weather, preserved in the silence. You couldn't live in those caves. They were too deep, too cold. So the art wasn't casual. People made torches, carried in stone lamps filled with animal fat, and worked in the flicker of flame. The walls shimmered with shadows. Every stroke of paint moved, danced, came to life. And they didn't stop at animals. There are handprints too, pressed against stone, sometimes stenciled with spray, often small, possibly children. It was like saying, I was part of this. I touched this world. We've even found symbols, patterns, lines, grids, marks that don't match any animal or person. Maybe they were early writing, maybe maps, maybe something we'll never understand. But what's clear is this. These weren't just survivors, they were artists. Long before cities, before metal, before written words, they made time to create, to express, to decorate stone with stories. And thousands of years later, those paintings are still there, still running, still leaping, still whispering across time. Proof that even in the harshest conditions, humans have always needed more than food and fire. They've needed meaning and a way to leave their mark. As the night deepened and the flames settled into a steady glow, the fire didn't just keep the cold away. It became a stage. This was the moment when the day's survival gave way to something older, softer, and deeply human: storytelling. There were no books, no scrolls, no written records. Everything that mattered, every lesson, every memory, every warning, was passed down through voice. People gathered close. Kids curled against parents. Elders sat cross-legged, faces lit by firelight, and began to speak. The stories weren't just tales. They were tools. How to hunt, what not to eat, where to find shelter. But they were wrapped in drama. A chase, a joke, a mysterious spirit in the woods. Stories carried history, told of the ancestors who fought giant beasts, of great hunts, of floods and stars and the first time someone saw lightning. Some stories were serious, some were funny, some were complete nonsense, but still got retold because someone liked the ending. Voices rose and fell like music. Hands waved to mimic animals or throw invisible spears. And when the fire popped at just the right moment, everyone jumped. Even kids told stories, their own versions of the day's adventure, slightly exaggerated, slightly unbelievable, but no one corrected them. Because this was how memory was made. There was no Netflix, no TikTok, but somehow it didn't feel like anything was missing. These moments by the fire created bonds, shared imagination, shared knowledge, shared humanity. And when the story ended, and the last laugh or sigh faded into crackling wood, everyone sat just a little closer, quiet, content, wrapped in the kind of silence that only comes after a good story, the kind that says, "We were here, we mattered, we'll remember." Of course, stories weren't the only way early humans filled the silence of night. Sometimes someone would start to tap a stick against a log, another would hum a low rhythm, a kid might spin in a circle just because no one told them not to. And just like that, music and dancing happened. There were no instruments, not really, but anything that made a sound was fair game. Rocks, bones, hollowed logs, even dried seed pods that rattled when shaken. Someone might blow across a reed or bone and discover a kind of flute. A rhythm would build, slow and steady, not to perform, not to impress, but because it felt good. The fire set the tempo, the wind hummed a backing tune, and the ground became a drum. Children danced first, of course, arms flailing, feet stomping. They didn't need permission or choreography, just space and a little attention. Adults joined in too, sometimes swaying, sometimes clapping, sometimes laughing at themselves. There was no audience, just a group, alive in their own rhythm. It wasn't just fun, it was connection. These rhythms and movements helped people bond, helped them release the stress of the hunt, helped them mark a successful day or cope with a hard one. And somewhere in that circle of flickering firelight, they remembered that they were more than survival machines. They were makers of sound, creators of movement, dancers in the dark. Music didn't need words, dancing didn't need steps, but together they reminded everyone around the fire that life was still beautiful, even when it was brutal. Even now, thousands of years later, if you close your eyes and listen closely, you might hear the echoes of that beat, still pulsing in our blood. But not every night ended in dancing. Sometimes the fire circle took on a different tone, quieter, heavier, because some nights were for ritual. Rituals weren't scheduled. There were no calendars or invitations. They happened when they needed to, after a death, before a big hunt, or when something unexplainable stirred fear in the group. The ingredients were simple: a fire, a few words passed down for generations, and a shared belief that some things were bigger than any one person. Someone, usually an elder or the group's shaman, would lead. Their voice wasn't louder, but it carried weight. They might paint their face with ash or ochre, hold bones or feathers, draw symbols in the dirt that only they seemed to understand. Smoke would curl upward like a message, and silence would settle in, thick and respectful. People might hum, or chant, or sit perfectly still. The rituals were often about connection, to the earth, to the sky, to ancestors long gone, and spirits they couldn't name but definitely felt. Death rites were especially important. When someone passed, they weren't just left behind. Their body might be wrapped in hides, their favorite tool placed beside them, a stone marked or a tree remembered, not because it changed anything, but because it meant something. Some groups likely believed in an afterlife. Others may have thought the spirit stayed nearby. Either way, no one was truly forgotten, because forgetting was the worst thing that could happen. Before a big hunt, there might be a blessing, a motion over the heart, a whispered word, a rock placed just so. If someone had a dream that felt important, it might be shared and decoded. A bird's cry, a shift in the wind, even a weird mushroom, these could all be signs. To us, it might seem like superstition. To them, it was survival, wrapped in meaning, a way to make sense of chaos. Rituals gave order to the unknown. They gave comfort to the grieving. And they gave the group a moment to pause, to remember, to hope, and to feel like their lives were part of something larger. Because even in a world ruled by tooth, claw, and weather, the human spirit still searched for answers. And sometimes those answers came with smoke, silence, and a whispered chant beneath the stars. But even with fire, food, and shelter, nothing in Paleolithic life was permanent. If there's one thing early humans learned early, It was this: you move or you starve. The earth back then didn't care how tired you were. When the herds left, the people followed. When the river dried, the people moved. And when the seasons shifted, so did entire communities, on foot, across miles of wild, unpredictable land. There were no maps, no roads, no wagons to carry your things, no calendar to say, let's wait until next week. Migration wasn't a decision, it was survival. And so, the journey began. Everyone packed up what they had, which wasn't much. A few stone tools, some scraps of dried meat, animal hides, bits of string made from sinew or twisted plants. Anything heavier than what you could carry had to be left behind. There was no room for just in case. You didn't travel alone. Your entire group moved together, young, old, healthy, injured. Grandparents limped along with the help of sticks. Babies were bundled into hide slings, strapped to backs or chests. Children were expected to keep up, and they did, mostly. Falling behind wasn't an option. The pace was slow, deliberate, not because people were lazy, but because the world didn't make it easy. The path might lead through dense forests with branches that clawed at your clothes, or across dry plains with no shade, where the sun baked the earth into cracked, brittle sheets, or over mountains where one wrong step could mean a broken ankle, or worse. There were rivers to cross, sometimes shallow, sometimes not. You rolled up your hide tunic, lifted your supplies above your head, and waded in. Or you built a makeshift raft from branches and rope, hoping it wouldn't fall apart halfway across. And then there was the weather. Rain turned the ground to soup. Snow froze your fingers and stiffened your joints. Wind could roar like a predator, tearing at the hides on your back, sending ashes from your fire scattering into the cold. Every step felt earned. Some days were long, quiet slogs. The only sounds were the crunch of feet on dry leaves or the snap of twigs beneath your soles. Other days were tense, eyes darting to every tree, every hill, every shadow. You never knew if you were walking into a storm, a rival group's territory, or something with sharp teeth and a bad mood. Travel was never casual, it was strategic. Scouts would sometimes go ahead, young, fast runners who knew the land better than anyone. They looked for fresh water, signs of game, or safe places to rest. They'd return with news, a stream just ahead, a dead animal, fresh or not, a strange print in the mud. The group listened and adjusted. Direction came from experience. They didn't have compasses, but they had memory. That bend in the river where the fish once ran, that hill shaped like a sleeping lion, that grove of trees where someone's grandmother was born. And above them, always, the stars. Early humans were skywatchers long before they were storytellers. They tracked the moon's phases, watched the constellations shift with the seasons. Those patterns guided their timing, when to leave, when to stay, when the herd might return, or when the winter would come. And sometimes people migrated not for food or warmth, but because they had to. Maybe a nearby tribe grew aggressive. Maybe the cave collapsed. Maybe the spirits whispered, "Move." Whatever the reason, you didn't question it. You just picked up your spear, tied your sandals tighter, and kept walking. Everything had to be portable. Your food, your tools, your fire. Yes, your fire traveled with you. A single burning coal, carried in a bundle of moss, bark, or a hollowed-out piece of wood, was guarded like treasure. If it went out, someone would be rubbing sticks together for hours, praying the wind didn't ruin their second, third, or fourth attempt. Some groups even assigned one person, usually someone patient, careful, and slightly unlucky, to be the firekeeper. Their job was simple: don't let the ember die. And so they walked, hundreds of miles over the span of seasons, years, generations. How far? Farther than most people today will ever walk in their lifetime. Across Africa, into the Middle East, through Asia, over land bridges into Europe. Eventually, into the unknown lands of the Americas. No cars, no roads, No shoes with arch support, just raw feet, strong legs, stubborn lungs, and the unshakable human drive to see what lay beyond the next hill. Sometimes they found paradise, lush valleys, rivers teeming with fish, caves that stayed warm all winter. Other times they found disaster, dry plains, empty forests, places where nothing grew and something always watched from the shadows. But still, they moved, because that's what humans do. We follow the wind, the stars, the tracks in the mud. We chase something better, even when we don't know what it looks like, and when the earth changes, we change with it. Migration wasn't a side story in Paleolithic life. It was the main one. Every tool they carried, every fire they built, every child they raised, it all depended on the ability to keep moving. Because home wasn't a place, it was the people walking beside you. And finally, after all the walking, the hunting, the scraping, the parenting, the wandering, the worrying, there came the quiet. The sun dipped low, the sky turned from gold to blue to charcoal gray, and the shadows grew long and still. This was the time every Paleolithic person looked forward to, whether they admitted it or not. The end of the day. There was no bedtime, no digital clock blinking at you from the nightstand, just your body telling you it had done enough. The group gathered near the fire, not because they were planning a party, but because the fire was the only thing left that kept the night from swallowing everything. Some sat on rocks, others curled into bundles of hide. Children leaned on parents, elders leaned on their memories. Dinner, if there was any, was eaten slowly. Bits of roasted meat, if the hunt had gone well. Boiled roots, foraged greens, or old dried scraps pulled from the emergency stash if it hadn't. There were no plates, no forks, no table manners, just hands, and quiet understanding about who got what. The best cuts went to the hunter, but the smallest hands usually got fed first. Not always because it was fair, but because those were the rules everyone quietly agreed on. Afterward, the conversation shifted, not about chores, not about survival, but stories, not loud or dramatic, just voices, low and steady, mixing with the crackle of burning wood. Some told of the day's events, how the trap nearly caught a deer, how someone saw a bear print in the mud, how the fire almost went out but didn't. Others told older stories, tales of the ancestors, of the great animal spirits, of the time a child outran a wolf or a woman healed someone just by singing. It wasn't entertainment. It was memory. It was culture. It was comfort. And sometimes, someone would sing, not in the way we think of music today, but rhythmic humming, soft chanting, maybe two stones clacked together in a steady beat. Children spun in slow circles. A mother tapped a hollow log. A grandfather mumbled the same tune he'd known for decades, maybe longer. These were not concerts. There were no stages, no applause, just rhythm to help you forget your blisters, melody to carry your thoughts somewhere gentler. And if the spirits liked it too, well, all the better. The fire was the center of it all. Its light flickered against the walls of whatever shelter they had managed to build, or if lucky, the inside of a cave. Shadows danced as people shifted and stirred. The heat was welcome, but so was the company. Even if you were tired, even if you had no energy left, you sat close, because being alone at night meant being vulnerable. People talked less as the fire burned lower, the day's weight finally settling across their shoulders. One by one, they fell quiet. Some leaned back, some laid down where they sat. Others shifted closer to a partner, a child, a sibling. Sleep came in layers. First your limbs relaxed, then your thoughts, then your awareness of time. There were no dreams of fame, no anxieties about emails or deadlines, just the soft hope that tomorrow would be warmer, drier, and safer. No one got 8 hours. The night was often interrupted, by noises, temperature drops, snoring neighbors, or the occasional scream from a distant predator. But even broken sleep was something, and when you woke, cold or restless, you stared at the fire. Sometimes it stared back. Before eyes closed, someone always checked the fire, shifted a log, blew softly on a coal, shielded it from the wind with a stone. The last person awake had one job: keep the flame alive, because without it, the night was longer, and tomorrow might not come. There were no lullabies, but the crackling fire worked just as well. There were no pillows, but a rolled-up hide was enough, and there were no locks on doors, just the quiet comfort of bodies close together, forming a kind of living barrier between whatever waited in the dark. If you were on the outer edge, you slept light. Every snap of a twig could jolt you up, not because you were paranoid, because your life, and the life of those inside the circle, might depend on it. Children dreamed of mammoths. Parents dreamed of quiet. Elders dreamed of what used to be, or maybe of nothing at all. The wind outside whispered stories of its own, curling around shelters, brushing across hides, and poking at coals like a playful ghost. No one talked about tomorrow, not yet. That was for morning. For now, all anyone wanted was rest, and the fragile peace that came with the knowledge that they had made it through another day, that they had eaten, that they had survived, that their feet still worked, their tools still cut, and their tribe still breathed, so under stars so bright they looked like pinholes in the sky. The tribe finally slept. The fire hissed, the embers glowed, the cold waited patiently at the edge of the light. But inside that glowing circle for a few sacred hours there was warmth, there was safety, and there was sleep. In a world without doctors, pills, or emergency rooms, pain was a familiar part of life. Cuts, breaks, burns, fevers, injury, and illness were constant companions in the Paleolithic world. And yet, early humans didn't simply suffer and hope. They fought back, in the only ways they knew how. Medicine, if you can call it that, began with observation. People watched what happened when someone ate a certain plant, or when they put mud on a wound. Trial and error was brutal, but it built a quiet foundation of knowledge. This leaf soothes, that one stings. This root helps the fever, that one stops your breathing. These discoveries weren't written down, they were remembered, passed from elder to child, healer to apprentice, word by word, often through stories, comparisons, or simple "don't do that again" lessons carved into memory by experience. Some individuals became known for their healing touch, or at least for being willing to try. These were the shamans, the herbalists, the caretakers. Their tools were simple: stone knives, bones for scooping or scraping, bundles of dried herbs, animal fat for salves. They didn't wear white coats. They wore experience, and sometimes feathers, shells, or face paint to signal their role. Injuries were common: a bad fall during a hunt, a misstep on rocky ground, a panicked animal's horn. These things left real damage, and with no splints from the pharmacy, bone setting was a community affair. 2 or 3 people might hold the patient down while someone else tugged and twisted a limb back into place. Straight sticks and twisted plant fibers served as primitive braces. The pain, unimaginable. The bravery, constant. For bleeding wounds, they used pressure, moss, or sometimes chewed up plants packed into the cut. Infection was a mystery, but over time they learned what helped and what killed. Honey, clay, and certain barks had antibacterial properties they couldn't explain, but trusted all the same. Burns were treated with cool mud or fat. Insect bites with crushed leaves. Snake bites depended on the snake. Some groups tried sucking out venom. Others used heated stones or ash. Superstition often mixed with genuine insight. Spitting 3 times, whispering to the wound, binding a charm nearby. Belief and biology danced together, and both played their part in healing. Fevers and illness were harder. You couldn't see the enemy, but you could offer tea made from bark or roots boiled in water. You could wrap someone in hides, rub their limbs, chant softly to ease their breathing. Sometimes the sick recovered. Sometimes they didn't. But care was always given. Shamanic healing also involved the unseen. Illness wasn't always physical. It might be spiritual, caused by a curse, an angry spirit, or bad energy. The healer might burn herbs, dance, speak in strange tones, or use rhythmic drumming to call the sickness out. Did it work? Sometimes. And when it didn't, people still felt seen, heard, cared for. That too was healing. And when medicine failed, the group responded, not with abandonment, but with community care. Someone would bring water, someone else would chew food and feed the sick by hand. Children fetched supplies, elders whispered comfort. Illness reminded the group that no one survives alone. The sick and injured weren't always cast out. If they could still contribute, even by telling stories, watching children, or remembering where the berries once grew, they had value. And even if they couldn't, they were still part of the circle. There was a kind of Paleolithic hospice, a place by the fire, a warm hide, a hand on the shoulder, and when healing was no longer possible, then came the quiet, the preparation, the end. But that's another chapter. Death wasn't an interruption in Paleolithic life. It was part of the rhythm. When someone died, the world didn't stop, but the group did, briefly, quietly, with reverence. They didn't have graves like we do now, no headstones, no written epitaphs, but what they left behind tells us that death wasn't treated casually. It was marked, it was honored. Bodies were buried in fetal positions, tucked as if returning to the womb of the earth, sometimes in shallow pits, sometimes in cave alcoves. The location mattered, a peaceful place, a remembered place, and they weren't just dropped in and forgotten. Archaeologists have found burials sprinkled with red ochre, a pigment made from iron-rich clay like blood turned to dust. Maybe it symbolized life. Maybe it was a send-off, a protective veil. Grave goods were sometimes included. Not jewelry for vanity, but tools, scrapers, spears, a shell, a carved bead, items that mattered to the person, or things they might need in whatever came next. This hints at belief, not just in death, but in something after. Some burials show signs of care, a child buried with an adult, a hunter laid to rest with their finest spear, bones arranged just so, stones placed over the body, not to weigh it down, but to protect it or mark it for others. There may have been rituals, a circle of people, a chant, a low hum, a final story told about the one who passed, not to entertain but to remember, to speak their name one more time. Grief wasn't private, it was communal. Mourning happened together. People might smear ash on their faces or stay silent for a time. Food offerings could be left. The fire might burn low in symbolic stillness. There were likely taboos, fears about spirits lingering. Some groups may have changed locations after a death to avoid angering unseen forces. Others may have placed protective charms or painted symbols to keep danger away. Children were taught to respect the dead, not to play near burial spots, not to mock the lost. Death was serious, sacred, but it wasn't just about loss. It was also about memory. The stories of the dead were passed on, their tools reused, their lessons retold. An old hunter's favorite route, a healer's knowledge of roots. They lived on in actions, not just names. And sometimes the graves became gathering spots, not for ceremony, but for closeness. A place where someone could sit, remember, speak into the soil. In some cultures today, stones are placed on graves to say, "I was here." Paleolithic people may have done the same, with bones, with shells, with markings carved into nearby trees or walls. There's no proof of weeping, but there is proof of care, of taking time, of treating the end not as a disposal, but as a passage. Because even without language, even without gods, Even without certainty, early humans knew that death was not nothing. It was powerful, and it deserved more than silence. Before children grew into hunters, foragers, or fire tenders, they were, well, just kids. Even in the Paleolithic world, childhood had its own rhythm, a mix of learning, laughter, and the occasional close call with a wild animal. There were no toys from a store, but there was play, lots of it. Children imitated everything they saw. A boy might chase imaginary prey with a stick spear, mimicking his father's stance. A girl might cradle a piece of fur like a baby, echoing her mother's care. These games weren't pointless. They were practice, training for survival, wrapped in imagination. They made up stories, took turns pretending to lead hunts or heal wounds, and turned bones, sticks, and stones into props. A rounded pebble might be a pretend cooking pot. A feather might become a prized possession. Some objects found in ancient settlements suggest they had toy-like items, tiny spears, small figurines, miniature tools. Not functional, just for play. But Paleolithic play wasn't all imaginary. It was physical too. Climbing trees, chasing each other, balancing on logs, wrestling, racing, all of it built agility, strength, and awareness of the environment. These were children raised by the earth, and the outdoors was their only playground. There were no schools, but every moment was a lesson. Learning through imitation was everything. Children watched adults closely, how to start a fire, sharpen a tool, or track an animal print. Then they tried it with guidance or just trial and error. Parents didn't lecture, they demonstrated, and older kids passed the knowledge down to younger ones in a constant cycle of learning. As they grew, chores slowly entered the picture. At first it was simple, fetching sticks, watching the fire, carrying bundles of herbs, but each task taught responsibility. By the time they reached adolescence, kids were expected to contribute, joining hunts, gathering food, crafting tools, or helping care for younger siblings. But the line between play and work was often blurred. A child sharpening a stick might be both pretending and practicing. A game of track the animal could become a real tracking lesson. Every moment mattered. Play wasn't always cheerful, though. Sometimes it reflected fear. Kids mimicked not just daily life, but also threats, playing out scenes where a leopard attacked or a river flooded. In doing so, they processed danger in a safe way. They learned resilience through pretend struggle. Songs and chants played a role too. Rhythmic clapping games, repeating songs heard from elders, simple call and response chants around the fire. These weren't just fun, they built memory, timing, and language skills. Friendships mattered. Bonds between kids often lasted into adulthood. These early alliances helped form the backbone of tribe unity. And like kids today, Paleolithic children had best friends, rivals, and cliques, though their playground drama probably involved who got to use the good stick. Discipline existed, but not in the form of scolding or timeouts. A child who broke something or caused harm might be ignored for a time, or sent to sit away from the fire. More often, discipline came in the form of quiet correction, a hand gently redirected, a task reassigned, a story told with a subtle warning. Community raised the child. Adults other than parents played roles, uncles, aunts, elders. If a parent died or was injured, the group filled in. Love wasn't limited to a nuclear unit. It spread across the camp. There were also rites of passage, a first solo hunt, a successful fire built without help, a night spent alone on watch. These were the turning points, small victories that earned respect. Kids became adults not on a birthday, but by proving they could survive and contribute. And when a child was born, it was a big deal, not just for the parents, but for the group. Another heartbeat around the fire, another future hunter, gatherer, or healer. Babies were cradled close, carried in fur slings, sung to with nonsense words and ancient lullabies. They didn't have cribs or blankets, but they had warmth and touch, and community. So yes, Paleolithic childhood was hard, dangerous, but it was also joyful, curious, and full of wonder, because even in a world of cold nights and hungry wolves, kids still laughed, still played, still dreamed. Before words shaped worlds, there were sounds, grunts, clicks, hums, a raised eyebrow, a pointed stick. Paleolithic language wasn't built in a day, but it built something far more important than words. It built connection. We don't know exactly when humans began to speak, but we know that even before full language existed, people were already communicating. At first, it was probably gestures, a hand wave to signal "come here," a shake of the head to mean no, a finger to the lips for quiet. These weren't random, they were intentional, repeated, remembered, shared, and then came sounds. A certain click might mean danger, a whistle might call for help, a repeated grunt could mean, "look there." Tone mattered just as much as content, a soft sound for comfort, a sharp bark for alarm. Even without words, a mother's soothing hum or a hunter's warning growl carried emotion. Over time, those sounds became more specific. A particular grunt meant water, a whistle for fire. The brain, hungry to organize, started assigning meanings. Memory, mimicry, and repetition did the rest. Language evolved slowly, generation by generation. Children imitated their parents, then added twists. A word became a phrase became a rhythm became the roots of grammar. But even before formal language, there was understanding. If a hunter crouched low and mimed throwing a spear, everyone knew what was about to happen. If someone drew an antelope in the dirt and tapped their chest, it meant, "I saw this. I was here." Communication wasn't limited to voice, it was full body, hand gestures, facial expressions, body posture. Paleolithic people read each other like stories, watching for signs of joy, anger, fear, or humor. They didn't need sentences to bond. A shared look after a hunt, a laugh at a child's misstep, a quiet nod around the fire. These were all messages, spoken without sound. Storytelling added another layer. Even before full language, there were performances. A hunter acting out the chase, a shaman miming a dream, a mother exaggerating the movements of an animal while teaching her child what to avoid. These gestures were the first narratives, the bridge between raw experience and shared memory. You didn't need words to tell a story, just motion, emotion, and firelight. Eventually, chanting joined the mix. Simple repeated sounds, used in rituals, lullabies, or group work. Chants helped people sync their movements, calm their minds, and hold on to important information. Repetition wasn't just helpful, it was survival. And then came naming. That moment when someone pointed at a mountain, made a noise, and the noise stuck. That mountain now had a sound, a word. It became easier to share knowledge. Go to the grunt. Stay away from the hiss. Language wasn't just personal, it became communal memory. With words, people could dream out loud, plan ahead, warn others of dangers miles away, describe things they hadn't seen yet. Words allowed humans to think in groups, and that changed everything. The power of language wasn't just in its ability to label the world, but to shape it, to imagine something before it happened, to tell a story and have others believe it, to build trust, fear, hope. A single word could start a hunt, or stop one. A story could keep children away from dangerous cliffs, or teach them how to survive the winter. Language was magic, not the kind with spells, but the kind with sound, memory, and meaning. And we still carry echoes of that magic today, in our laughter, in our silence, in the way we reach for each other with words, still hoping to be understood, because deep down, language was never just about speaking, it was about belonging.